What psychological trick do you know to really catch someone? Story 1. My friend and I did elevator experiments in college. We had both commented on how it's odd how universally accepted elevator protocol is, and no one needs to tell you the rules. Don't talk once the door is closed. Face the door. Don't fart. We decided to see if we could carry on an innocent conversation while people got in, and it was extremely difficult to keep talking as we could feel the tension rise. Then we tried making small talk with strangers when they got on. Nope. Then just for fun, we got on and facing the wrong way. That did make some people laugh, but mostly just annoyed with our shenanigans. Story 2. While driving at night with a buddy of mine, another car tailgated us on a basically empty road, swerved around us only to brake check us needlessly. Didn't even get the sense this was aggressive driving, just Thai driving. At the next red light, we pull up next to them, and it's two young women. I was content to give dirty looks and the what the look, but my friend rolls down his window, leans over and yells, "Your friend is ugly." I know, immature, but the genius was immediately obvious to me. They both immediately hated us and reacted thinking, how dare they, what, etc. But now they're both thinking, who is he talking about? Never got to see the reaction, but all it would take is one of them saying to the other, "I can't believe he said that about you," or something to that effect, and boom, the match of hatred is lit betwixt the two. Again, I'm not sure it was even effective, but the thrust of the attack seemed clever at the time. Story 3. This one requires a little explanation, but stay with me, it's worth it. If you work in a place where there are those dry erase type whiteboards, you can use them to mess with one of your coworkers' heads. First, write like 2 random words and underline them. Then make a list under those words of your coworker's name and the 3 or 4 other people that you know they would least like to be associated with. Then, and this part is important, erase the words on top, just enough that they are impossible to read. Eventually, your coworker will find the list and they will drive themselves crazy trying to figure out what the purpose of the list was, who wrote it, and why their name was on it. Story 4. Okay, here's a good one. So, let's say you're talking to someone who's guarded. They clam up and don't say much or respond minimally. Humans want to be understood. They also want to avoid being misunderstood. So, when someone gives a shallow answer, you repeat back that last word. They will elaborate to clear up confusion. Story 5. I worked with a guy that I absolutely could not stand. He wasn't even in our department, but would spend his day walking by our area and reporting to our boss on everything we were doing or not doing. He spent more time doing that than whatever it was he was actually supposed to be doing. I got so tired of him that I decided to out-petty his pettiness by being sarcastically nice to him when other people weren't around. My tone was always so condescending and passive-aggressive. He eventually started telling people how nasty and unprofessional I was. When other people were around, though, I treated him like everyone else. Everyone started thinking there was something wrong with him. He even told HR and my boss that I was giving him menacing glances during a meeting, which I was, but no one could prove it. He made himself look bad each time he said something because no one else ever saw anything or noticed any bad behavior on my part. I did this for almost a year because it was so much fun and it drove him crazy. People would always ask me what his problem with me was, and I'd always say I didn't know. Story 6. One boss I had would never answer you immediately. He'd always take a moment to think about what he was going to say, like there's no way he's going to be rushed into any decision. It made him appear very organized and sure of himself. Had another boss that you'd knock on his glass door, and he'd always wait a moment before waving you in, even when he wasn't doing anything. This made him look more like but he kinda was. Story 7. My friend will randomly say things that sound racist but really aren't. Something like, "Man, I'm hungry. I feel like a Cuban who just changed his toilet paper roll. Man, I'm thirsty. I feel like a Canadian who just bought some new cologne." I know him well enough to know he's just saying random crap, but when people first meet him, it's hilarious to watch their expressions. Some people get offended for whatever random country he chose, and they really can't express why. Story 8. Okay, so this is more of a harmless one, but it can totally mess with someone in a playful way. If you're talking to someone and you subtly start mirroring their body language, like crossing your arms when they do or leaning in when they do, it creates this weird sense of connection without them realizing it. But then, if you suddenly stop and do something completely opposite, like slouching when they're sitting upright, it can make them feel slightly off balance or confused without knowing why. It's subtle, but it definitely throws them off their rhythm in the moment. Story 9. If you want to get something out of someone, let them do most of the talking while asking mostly questions, and only respond to the parts they talk about that get you to your goal. You'll still be engaged in the conversation, but people tend to forget about most of what they say if one thing becomes the final point of the conversation. Basically, lead the other person from behind. The trick is subtlety. Story 10. If you can learn to laugh spontaneously at nothing, it's a great way to make someone look and feel foolish for insulting you. When they say a snide dig, laugh at it, and then laugh more and more. It can't feel fake. Laugh until you're bent over holding your sides and can barely breathe. Every time I've done this, everyone else in the room invariably starts laughing too, and then it's easier to laugh even harder because now it's genuinely funny. Wave your hand in the stop, I can't take it anymore gesture. They look completely ridiculous, and you seem like the funniest person in the room. Story 11. Mid-conversation, my brother used to quickly pause, lean in, look intensely at something on my face, and then either say absolutely nothing or never mind, and insist that it's nothing if I pressed. This happened a lot, and to this day I don't know if my makeup was bad or if he was just with my head. I am envious of his genius if it's the latter, so I share it with you. Story 12. A psychological trick I pulled on one of my relatives still gives me a sense of satisfaction to this day. When I found out she was talking behind my back but pretending to be all smiles and sweetness in front of me, I didn't confront her. Instead, I cut her off completely, no explanations, no warnings. I blocked her on everything social media, phone, and in real life. I gave her zero access to my life. It's been 2 years since I made that move, and guess what? She's still posting on Facebook. My other relatives told me about it, about what happened between us, obsessing over something I've long since moved on from. Watching her spin in circles while I live my best life is oddly satisfying. Silence, they say, is the loudest response. You know what you did. Figure it out. Sayonara. Story 13. When somebody is talking to you and keeps rambling on, take your pointing finger and start rubbing your chin area as if you had left a chocolate stain. Look at the rambling talker in the eye when doing this, as if you want to tell them, hey, you got something on your face, but do not utter a word, just keep listening. The trick is to hold your head high, face above them, not downward. Even lick your finger to moisten to rub, clean your chin as well. Just keep rubbing as if you're cleaning, and very soon the person who will not shut up will start rubbing their chin as well. Story 14. I enjoy some light trolling at times, which is not a super healthy habit TBH, but the most fun I've had is the kill 'em with kindness strategy. If someone is making a bad faith argument, take it at face value and explain the argument back to them in a way that sounds really nice and genuine. Isn't it pretty weird that they used to call it global warming, but now it's climate change? Pretty convenient, huh? Yeah, it's kind of odd on the surface, but science grows and changes as we understand it more. It's really cool, Mo. They either drop the bull, and you have an opportunity to have a sincere conversation with someone who's genuinely curious and just approaching it from a weird place, or they double down and get super defensive, making themselves look like a... If they do that, just double down on the positivity and toy with them. People hate that so much it's hilarious, but you're also not adding aggressive vitriol to the wider conversation. Story 15. It's nothing crazy. I discovered it myself. If you ever have something in your hands and you want to get rid of it, but not throw it away, just look like you're trying to do something in a hurry. Say, oh, and go for one of your pockets while you hand the thing you want someone to take, empty soda can or trash or whatever, and hand it to them. They'll usually just take it because we all have this tendency to want to help someone who is right in front of us and seems like he needs to do something urgently. I've done this to friends and my siblings. They will still sometimes fall for it, but not like when I first started it. Those were the days. Oh boy, the wild west of waste disposal. Story 16. I used to work for a doctor with my coworker, and we shared the office with another doctor and his 2 employees. They used to always try to rile us up, I guess. They would text each other and then look over at us and giggle, and they do other stuff that's too tedious to mention. Anyway, the thing I did in response that I think kind of bugged them was that I didn't notice at all. My coworker would be like, they're texting about us, and I'd be like, oh, who gives a... Apparently there was a feud between the 2 offices that was completely put on hold during the 2 years that I worked there because I gave them so little that they didn't have anything to hold on to and make a big deal out of. After I left the job, apparently there was a huge blowout fight between the staff of the 2 offices, and my former employer moved offices. Vertical bar. Apparently after I left, they were like, I miss Gnostic_heaven. Things were so good when she was around. It was because I used the psychological trick of really not giving a what people who didn't matter thought about me. Story 17. One of my favorite things to do when I'm running tabletop games is to have players roll perception/awareness, etc., then jot down a quick note and keep going. A few of those phantom rolls and you've got yourself a paranoid group of players in short order. Story 18. An old boss of mine would do this thing that annoyed the hell out of me. After finishing the conversation, I'd walk away. He'd call my name, I'd turn and say yes, and he'd ask how far would you have gotten if I didn't call you back. Not every time, so it would always catch me off guard. Story 19. Not really a trick, but when I'm driving and someone is continually matching my speed in the other lane that I need to move over into, keeping up with me in the slow lane or falling back to me in the passing lane no matter 15 miles per hour difference for literally miles, I speed up and then pop the brakes a bit. PSA, only do this if you are the only two cars on the road. 100% of the time it works, they fly past, and I move into my lane after them. 99% of the time they also tap their brakes for no reason, and then assume either they missed something on the road or you're an insane driver and stay away from you after that. Story 20. Used to sit opposite someone at work who I didn't really get on with. Occasionally I'd swap over the M and N keys on their keyboard before swapping back a few hours later. They could tell something was up, but they couldn't work out what. It went on for months. Story 21. Don't know if this counts as psychological, but ask someone for something but jumble up the word of what you are asking for. For example, hey, could you go out to the car and grab the insert slightly unintelligible gibberish word out of the trunk? So many of my friends would fall for this, often returning asking what they were supposed to grab. The trick was kind of quickly saying the unintelligible word, like stumbling over it. Sometimes I would try to draw it out with, you missed it. I think it's next to the black blah blah, etc. And they would go look a second time. Story 22. Ignore people who try to trigger you. An ex of mine who was violent, never hit me, thank God, and screamed a lot, was furious because I was always calm. I said to her once, look, I'm not going to talk to you when you are screaming. Take a few deep breaths, walk it off, and come back when you are ready to talk in a normal tone. What I feel inside is one thing, but I'll never show that you made me sad or angry. I'm in control of my emotions, and I'm not going to give you that power that I'll show you what I feel about you. Edit. I don't know if you can count this as a psychological trick, but yeah, it *seekx them up. Story 23. A lot of these psychological tricks are just typical passive-aggressive behavior. People who engage in confrontations, then refuse to engage beyond that in good faith, will deploy these sorts of tactics. They are not something to be celebrated. There is funny stuff in here like offering a piece of gum and not taking one for yourself. But then there are the pages of stuff like, are you okay? And I can see how someone like you would think that. I cringe at the lack of accountability from someone who managed to engage in a debate only to say something like that. Story 24. If someone is just beating the tar out of you in something like tennis or a skill-based game or even something like a work task, ask them, wow, you're doing great today. How are you doing that? When somebody's performing really well, they're probably in the zone. It's also called being in a state of flow. Basically, they're not thinking about what they're doing. Their brain just takes over and they're doing it unconsciously and usually doing very well. This is the state that people want to be in with any activity. By asking them that question, you make their brain focus on their performance rather than actually doing the activity. It completely takes them out of the zone and out of flow to the point where they have to work really hard to get back into it. It's like the ultimate interruption. Most likely, they didn't know how they got into that zone in the first place. So you'll really screw up their performance to the point where they can't really recover for that game, match, or day. I learned this when I was a kid playing tennis, but I've used it many times, including playing poker. It doesn't work all the time, but for me, I've noticed it works about 8 out of 10 times. Story 25. Listen really carefully to what they say and then bring up a minute detail of it later, and they will think you are a mind reader. Example of a real conversation I've had. Coworker. I'll be out of town for a few days. I won't be accessible by phone. I'm looking forward to being outside in the nice weather. Me. So where are you going camping? Coworker. How did you know I was going camping? Also, you said to me once, insignificant piece of advice from 2 years ago, and that meant a lot to me. Gets them every time. People like to be heard. Story 26. I have 3 I enjoy. In text chat, add A to the message, or after something innocuous, and people will worry that they've said something offensive. While leaving a group setting, just ask one person to do the impression of the other person because it's amazing and then leave. Say something in a tone that sounds like it's contradicting their points, but in fact, your words agree with them. An example I have is when at work we were debating which game's console was winning and they were arguing for PlayStation. I said, well, yeah, PlayStation's only winning because of its exclusive first-party titles, excellent hardware, and its die-hard fan base. But in a tone like I was going to disagree with them. They were really confused because of course it is. Story 27. Okay, this one's a game changer. Next time you're talking to someone and they ask you a question, answer part of it, but in a really vague or mysterious way. Then without them saying anything, just act super normal like the conversation is moving on. Watch them squirm as their brain tries to fill in the missing pieces. It drives people nuts. Bonus points if you add something like, oh, but that's a whole other story. They'll never be able to stop thinking about it. Story 28. My psychologist told me the worst thing my MIL did was to constantly keep me on edge. Sometimes she'd be lovely. Other times she'd say the most awful things. So I never knew what to expect and it messed me up. Probably not what the psych intended, but now I do this to people who deserve it. It's quite effective. Story 29. Stay totally quiet when you're arguing with someone and you think they make a bad point. They will feel the need to keep talking and will start justifying the point, which just makes them dig a deeper hole. And then you can just keep not saying anything. That's when they probably start feeling desperate, which makes them react differently depending on the person. Being on the receiving end of this is probably stressful but in an ideal world, it really doesn't have to be. Story 30. If someone's taking their anger out on you, look at them in the eyes and don't say anything. They'll squirm. I do it a lot at work with stressed family members of patients. I'm happy to help them through this time, but some of them approach me with such heat. I just do the intentional silence and lock eyes with them for a few seconds after they finish, and they usually end up apologizing. Story 31. Whenever I play a game, I tell everyone I'm a longtime expert. We played Jenga over Christmas. Unopened, but I told everyone I was a Jenga master. When I made a move, my son was like, "How?" I told my husband the other day I was just bolting, and he said he thought I was a real Jenga master. People just believe whatever. Story 32, lol. Okay, so one thing that low-key messes with people is mirroring them. Like, if you subtly copy their tone, body language, or even the words they use, they'll usually feel like you're on the same vibe and start liking you more. But if you push it too far or make it obvious, it flips. Suddenly they're super uncomfortable, like, "Wait, are you mocking me?" It's kind of wild how much we notice without even realizing it. Story 33. I did this to strangers when I got bored out in public. Stare at someone who's either walking past you or isn't directly facing you and then look away after a while. It's so funny when they notice your gaze too late and do a double take out of the corner of your eye. Story 34. I heard this from the comedian Sebastian Maniscalco on his podcast. I plan to keep this in my back pocket in case I ever find myself in a situation like this. He was the first to go on an airplane, and the flight attendant recognized him and was a fan of his. But while this was happening, he was having stomach issues, and he was basically about to his pants. So he talks to her for a minute, then goes to the bathroom and blows up the toilet, and the toilet doesn't flush. He goes into survival mode. He does all these crazy things to try and cover up he's using layers of TP, foam sanitizer, and he's stuck in the bathroom until this is resolved. But after a number of minutes, like 10, 15 minutes by the grace of God, the toilet flushes. He manages to find some deodorizer in the bathroom, then starts spending a few more minutes dotting the walls with it to cover up the smell. Problem is, he's been in there a really long time. Without a doubt, the sweet flight attendant has to know that he's ting his brains out. She's going to tell everyone that she saw Sebastian Maniscalco on an airplane, and he tore up the bathroom. So he goes out of the bathroom, and the first thing he does is say, "Hey, is there any internet on this flight?" Because no way would someone blow up a toilet and then think about internet. I'm keeping this. If I'm in a situation like this, I just come up with a question that totally S with people and redirects everything. Story 35. 1. I remember hearing from Neil Bortz back in the early 2000s. Go up to somebody, ideally a coworker nobody really likes, and ask them if they're feeling okay. If they reply they do, ask them if they're sure. They don't look okay. Keep doing this, with more concern in your voice each time. It's better if you can get others to play along. Guarantee by lunchtime, they'll question their own wellness, maybe even start actually feeling sick, and go home for the rest of the day, maybe even take the next day off. Story 36. Reading some of these answers between my randomness, awkwardness, and attention span, I finally realize how I unintentionally piss people off. I'm like, "Oh, it's it" with people when you're nice to them, saying, "Never mind" mid-sentence, conversations in elevators, stating out loud how they're feeling, laughing at their insults, and especially the one about explaining bad faith arguments in a positive light. Thanks, Reddit. My natural personality is a mind, I guess. No pun intended. Story 37. It's super up but effective, and it only works on strangers. Before you start a competitive one-on-one game with someone, tell them, "I hate you." Nothing else, nothing more. But do it right before the game starts so they don't have time to say anything else. It only works in a one-on-one setting. It gives them a mixture of confusion and being insulted, resulting in them being flustered and becoming desperate to win so that they can get back at you. This guy would do this on an online checkers game from back in the day, and it always worked. But it only worked once because people would block him. Story 38. If you want to know what people around you truly listen to you, I use this especially at work, as I am a mid-level manager trying to get into a senior-level position. So office politics are where I practice this. Pick a phrase that everyone in the workplace uses and put your own spin on it. For example, The majority of people I work with say, "That's crazy," so I adjusted it to "That's wild." And in any other phrase that uses crazy, I use wild in its place. It'll take a few weeks to really get it going, but once you start replacing that word enough, the people that really listen to you, especially the ones that don't want you to know they do, will start to use the same phrasing and never even seem to notice themselves doing it. Now you'll know who is a waste of breath and who is truly listening. Story 39. I work in an industry full of crazy narcissists who will openly insult you in meetings. My favorite thing is to act like every slight they make at me is a compliment and treat it as such. Genuinely thank them when they say something backhanded. Make them think you didn't pick up on the slight but thought they were saying something positive about you. It's amazing. You get to watch their brain melt in real time. Story 40. Stop talking and act all awkward when they enter the room as if you were talking about them, even if you weren't. If the other person isn't in on it, be the one to change the subject and make it obvious. The other person you were talking about will be confused, but that's okay. They are a NPC in this scenario. The target will think you were discussing them. Story 41. Interrupt someone with every sentence and talk over them. Saw a documentary about a cult that taught their members to use this technique to destabilize their discussion partners in confrontations. It was super effective and fascinating to see in action. It really drove the other person crazy. Story 42. When telling a fake story, I make sure my tone does not change so that I don't give myself away. And if I'm feeling particularly cheeky, I'll rope someone into it. Whether the second person joins in or gets just as confused, it's fun either way because there's also a 50-50th chance of the story actually having happened and that neither of them remember it. Story 43. I used to know a guy who would pretend to take photos of you with his phone mid-conversation, but really, he'd just be flashing the torch. He'd flash the torch and pretend to visually assess the resulting photo, and then pretend to take another, all while the conversation just got more awkward. It was absolutely infuriating. Story 44. My roommate hogged the shower for him and the long string of girls he brought to our apartment. I put a Jolly Rancher in the shower head to give them an unclean, sticky feeling. Soon his dates wouldn't come over, associating that icky feeling to his own hygiene or the thought of being with my roommate. When he stopped having dates coming over every weekend, I took the Jolly Rancher out of the shower head and tossed it in the trash, getting to take a quick shower rather than a drawn-out bath. Story 45. If someone left something in your house/car/wherever the group of people you know meet up, tell the person least likely to see the owner of the item to give it back to them. Asking someone to do that is normally such a reasonable request that they'll only realize they can't, in fact, get the item to the person until halfway through the exit. Story 46. I've done a lot of dangerous things in my life for what I believe has been and will always be for the greater good. For the most part, the dangerous bits have a decent amount of time between them. Enough for me to build a life, fall in love, and say goodbye. But when I say goodbye, it's a slow process of making the person I love hate me. I want them to hate me because I don't know if I'll be coming back. If I get hurt, I don't want them to feel the need to take care of me. If I die, I don't want them to feel that kind of loss. I'd much rather the people I end up loving end up hating me. For me, it would be easier to not put that kind of weight on somebody. For them, it's them up because they don't understand that they've done nothing wrong. I'm wrong because I was never honest with them from the start about who I am. I tell them as I leave, but they are always too shocked to process, or too enraged with the hate I instilled in them to even care, or too caught in the web of lies I've weaved to form the identity that they see, rather than seeing the soldier underneath that as breaking off another piece of their heart to do what needs to be done. Story 47. When you're walking by a random person, just abruptly say, "Watch out, don't step in that," and keep walking. They will immediately jump to the side and then be confused as hell, trying to figure out what they almost stepped in. Another one is for you and a friend to stand at opposite sides of a hallway, and when someone walks your way, immediately act like you are playing tug of war with your friend. I've literally had people try to walk over the invisible rope and we got a car to stop on the road before. A third one is to just simply point very intently at the ground when there is nothing there. Don't say anything at all. Just point and look back and forth between them and the ground. Edit, added the third one. Lee, story 48. Are you sure about that? But in an inquisitive tone with no judgment in it. And it could be in response to literally anything. An outfit, an opinion, something they know to be true, a relationship, etc. It only works if you can say it in a way that makes them totally unsure of if you're being mean, misheard them, know something they don't, or they can't have any idea where you're coming from. Story 49 poker players out there. If you talk about how bad your hand is and how unlucky you are and they stay quiet, start talking about what you can beat and how it's not that bad, as if you're talking yourself into a call. Nobody will say a word if you're bluffing and you're folding, since that's what they want. You start taking about what you can beat and how you might have to call, they'll want to ease you back into folding, so they'll start talking. They felt comfortable at the beginning, so naturally wants to get back there. Obviously, good players will say all, but there's a lot more bad than good. Story 50. In a dialogue, if you stare at someone without blinking or talking for example, 5 seconds, assuming the discussion is a bit of an argument or disagreement, the person talking will feel awkward, which can cause them to backtrack or stutter, ultimately losing track of what they said, unless they're a really good speaker, in which case they know to keep their cool even when there's an awkward silence. Story 51. I once knew a guy who was kind of a user and deadbeat, friend of a friend that I didn't like, but he was always showing up at group events. He would suddenly ask people, "Why do you hate yourself?" Most people don't, so they'd tell him to shove it. But a couple times I saw people react like he'd read their minds. They'd get emotional and start confessing all kinds of stuff. Story 52. For girls, give your boyfriend, fiance, or husband a cup of coffee you prepare every single day before he leaves for work or whatever. And whenever you two have an argument, still make him a cup of coffee, but make it with less caffeine. And since his body got used to what you give him on the normal days, he won't be in a good mood. He'll think that the reason is because you two had an argument, so he'll make it up with you. You're welcome. Story 53. During unnecessary meetings, take notes with a red pen. It doesn't matter what you're writing. Just appear to record everything. Randomly underline things. Add big question marks. Glance up at the person speaking every so often, but mainly keep a very neutral face focused on your notes. At the end of the meeting, nod at the person, collect your things, and leave without speaking if possible. Makes people think you're very serious about business, or it'll make a shifty manager become very nervous. I find it works. Bonus points if you wear glasses. Take them off at some point. Pinch the bridge of your nose slightly, as if you have a headache, and flare your nostrils. Helps if someone is droning on and on. Makes them aware that they need to end the meeting. Story 54. My brother and I used to play a game where we would find someone at a party who was messed up or the most sober person at the party, and we would have a competition like Jenna to see who was the last person to get them to hold the most stuff. So like you would just go up to them and be like, "Hey man, can you hold this real fast? Or can you take this from me?" But then you just hand them a cup or a lamp or whatever. Then my brother would go up and do the same thing, and we would go back and forth taking turns to see how many things we could get them to hold before they realized their arms were full and would question the situation or put things down. If you're really tactful and have a good approach, you can get people holding all kinds of stuff without really questioning it or being aware that that's what they're doing. Whoever hand them something when they realize they can't hold anymore or that their arms are full loses. Then they have to take a shot. Pretty fun. Story 55. Yesterday we were talking about how it is that sometimes we use our phones to try and find our phones at work. And it gave one of my coworkers an idea. So she called her mom on her phone and went, "Hey mom, I think I left my phone in your car. Can you swing by when you get a chance so I can grab it?" And her mother agreed to do so. And there was about 15 seconds of giggling before her mom yelled at her for doing that at work. She told her mom she got permission to make the call, and her mom told us we're all buttheads. Story 56. If someone ever cheats on you or breaks up with you, the best way to really mess with their head is to not seem upset in front of them. Act like they did you the biggest favor. Start hanging out with friends more, do fun stuff, and act the opposite of vindictive. This only works if you can make it seem genuine, though. You can't post like crazy on social media, and worst case, you do get over them and find other things that are worth your time anyway. Story 57, web meetings. Okay, folks, I'm a remote worker. Let's hear your best psyche outs for web meetings. I'll start with one perfect for a friend. You can mouth a couple of words silently in the middle of a sentence. We really need to carve out underscore, 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 underscore from the budget. Doing it a couple of times. The first time, they simply ask you to repeat yourself. The second time, they'll get all distracted, and you'll see them fiddling with all their audio settings. Story 58. It's more of a positive sort of airy, but somebody pulled this on me. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and then I'm going to ask you why you answered the way you did. And just do your best to explain even if it doesn't quite make sense. What's your favorite color? What's your favorite animal? What's your favorite kind of weather? Then, after I answered and did my best to awkwardly explain to each one, the explanation of the answer to your first question, favorite color, reveals how you feel about yourself. The explanation of the second answer reveals what you look for in a partner. The explanation of your third answer reveals how you feel about God's spirituality. I'm sure it's not going to work on everyone, because it's a little bit fortune-tellery, but I learned a bit about myself from that little experiment. Story 59. Send them flowers addressed to them from their psychological devil, the person they hate most. Send them sample packs to Viagra, Blue Chew, Hims, dating sites, Adam Eve to their home, work and parents' address. Sign up for swanky mags and have them addressed to the other person's partner. Send over an in-service hooker to their residence during an important event. You can really do a lot of these days. I should not have answered this question. Story 60. I once had a guy I worked with that was a constant dollar hash plus talker, and it was well known he had a few issues. I was once in a conversation with the supervisor right beside this guy, and without losing a beat, I looked at him. We've all been trying to reach you, and we need you to wake up now. Then immediately continued my conversation with my sup. He was quiet for the rest of the day. Story 61. Tell them you love them. You love them more than they love you. You will love them forever, and they feel lucky to have you in their lives. Talk about marriage and set a time frame for getting engaged. Talk about how you'll have kids together. Talk about the strategies you'll employ if your relationship is on the rocks. Do this for 5 years. And then one day, without warning, say you no longer love them and never will, that they aren't to contact you so you both can heal and walk out of their life. Story 62. If a woman leaves you and you do not want her back, do the following. Tell her you want her back at least once per month through text or DM. As long as she thinks she can have you back, she'll never bother you, BC. She thinks you're needy and desperate. She leaves you alone and you live in peace. Be happy. If a woman leaves you and you do want her back, just show up to a public event with a smile on your face and a younger woman. Next theme. What's the weirdest thing you've overheard in public? Story 1. I overheard this conversation between two people at a coffee shop. One was talking about how they were convinced their dog could understand their thoughts, and they were trying to figure out how to communicate telepathically with it. Story 2. I was sitting in a park trying to set up the running program on my smartwatch, and there was a couple across from me whispering their astonishment about the little screen on my hand. They couldn't comprehend it and almost sounded concerned. They were like IDK 30s, so it's not like they were old and this was like 2 years ago. So I have no idea how they'd never seen a smartwatch before, and it felt like I met some Amish aliens. Story 3. I was walking around in Target with my brother, and some guy was on the phone talking about coon hunting. The next few sentences, the guy started talking about how sneaky raccoons are. To this day, IDK why you'd be on the phone in Target talking about hunting raccoons while looking at headphones. Story 4. A toddler, maybe 4, 5 years old, was trying to climb up MRT seats, and when doing so, he was grabbing mom's collar and it stretched the collar down, which inevitably threatened a wardrobe malfunction. Mom chided kid that he shouldn't pull down her clothes, exposing her, and everyone could see her. Kid just said, but at home you let father see you without clothes. Story 5. Me and my boyfriend were waiting in line to check out at a liquor store with an employee sweeping up a broken bottle a few feet away from us. What I'm assuming was her manager walked over and started talking to her about the glass, and we heard the employee say, "I've never actually been taught how to sweep left-handed, only right." Then she went on to explain that's why she can only sweep half the mess one way, and it'll take longer because she had never been taught to sweep left-handed. Story 6. I was traveling with a client in the late 90s, and he loved his gizmos and had a wired earbud/mic attached to his phone. We had to fly out one day on an early flight, so before we boarded, we went to the men's room to relieve our bladders. So he's standing at the urinal, looks down and says, "Well, you're up early." He was in his late 60s. It took me a minute to realize he was answering a call, but it was still weird. Story 7. Standing behind two guys in the line for famous chicken rice, talking quite softly, but I could still hear. Guy says he once slept with his manager at work. An older but still very attractive woman. Says it was the best sex he ever had. Some months later, he got together with a girl, went home for dinner with her family, and boom, the mother is the manager he banged. I had to leave the queue because I couldn't contain my laughter. Story 8. I can't even think of my contribution to this thread right now. I just want to say that it makes me so happy that everyone here saves those little bits of story, and it just reminds me of Lewis Black's bit about the "if it weren't for my horse girl." Story 9. I was traveling a few years after 9/11s. I stopped to get something to eat at a random fast food joint. I sat next to two women who were very concerned about terrorism. They lived near, but not within Carson City, Nevada. They were convinced that terrorists are targeting them because they are near the state capital. Having been to Carson City, I can assure you that it could be wiped out by nuclear blast and nobody would notice. Furthermore, they lived significantly outside of Carson City in a very rural area.